We're counting down 30 everyday things every 1950s classroom had that have completely disappeared. Objects that shaped how an entire generation of American kids learned to read, write, and sit still, but today would look like relics from another world. From the purple-stained paper that smelled like heaven to the cast-iron stove that warmed frozen fingers, each one tells a story of chalk dust, ink stains, and a kind of schooling we will never see again. Some of these vanished so quietly that nobody noticed they were gone until the memory of them was all that was left. And number one shaped almost every minute of the school day. So stick around. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because you'll want to share these memories with someone who lived them. Let's begin our countdown with number 30. Number 30, the hand-crank pencil sharpener bolted to the wall by the door was the loudest piece of equipment in any 1950s classroom. That little cast metal machine, usually a Boston or an Apsco, clamped to the windowsill or the edge of the chalk tray, and every kid in the room knew its sound by heart. You slid your yellow Ticonderoga into the hole, cranked the handle, and listened to that satisfying grind soften into a smooth whir when the point was sharp. Getting sent to sharpen your pencil was a small adventure, a chance to stretch your legs and glance out the window. The shavings curled into the little drawer, smelling of cedar and graphite, and emptying that drawer was a coveted job. Today's classrooms run on mechanical pencils and quiet electric sharpeners, and that hand-cranked ritual has ground to a stop. Number 29. Built into the top right corner of nearly every wooden desk was a small round hole, and in the 1950s, many of them still held an inkwell. That little glass or ceramic pot of ink was a holdover from an earlier age, refilled by the teacher from a big bottle she kept locked in her cupboard. Kids dipped their pens into it, careful not to overload the nib, while the smell of ink mixed with the smell of pencil shavings and floor wax. The inkwell was also the source of endless mischief. Generations of boys discovered that a girl's pigtail dangling near an open inkwell was an irresistible temptation. By the time ballpoint pens took over, the inkwells were emptied for good, leaving behind only that mysterious little hole that puzzled children for decades after. Number 28. The dip pen and the fountain pen ruled penmanship before the ballpoint conquered the classroom. In the early 1950s, a child learned to write with a wooden holder and a steel nib, dipping, blotting, and dipping again, fighting the constant battle against drips and smears. Teachers inspected hands and pages alike, and a blotted assignment could earn a frown no matter how neat the words. The fountain pen felt like an upgrade, a marvel that carried its own ink, but it leaked in pockets and ran dry at the worst moments. When the cheap, reliable ballpoint arrived and schools finally allowed it, the steel nib and the inkwell vanished together, taking ink-stained fingers with them. Number 27. Blotting paper sat on every desk and inside every notebook, an absolute necessity in the age of wet ink. That soft, slightly fuzzy pink or white sheet existed for one purpose: to press down on freshly written words and soak up the excess before it could smear into an embarrassing blue smudge. Kids learned the gentle art of the blot, pressing firmly but not sliding, lifting cleanly to reveal crisp letters underneath. A good blotter was treasured, often printed with advertisements from the local bank or feed store, doubling as a tiny billboard on the schoolroom desk. Run a hand across a page too soon without it, and a whole afternoon's careful work was ruined in an instant. The moment ink dried instantly in a ballpoint, blotting paper lost its job, and that humble sheet quietly disappeared. Number 26. Marching across the top of the chalkboard, just below the ceiling, ran a long strip of cards showing the perfect cursive alphabet. The Palmer method and the Zahner-Bloser charts hung in nearly every American classroom, each loopy capital and tail-flicked lowercase letter rendered in flawless, ideal form. Children glanced up at those cards 1,000 times a day, copying the slant of the capital Q that looked more like a number 2, tracing the proper way to join an O to an N. Penmanship was treated as a serious skill, practiced for an hour at a stretch, with the whole arm moving, not just the fingers. Those charts represented a standard every student was expected to reach. As typing and then keyboards took over and cursive itself faded from the curriculum, the alphabet strip came down for the last time. Number 25. The chalkboard erasers, those felt-backed wooden blocks, were the source of one of the most beloved chores in school life in the 1950s. By the end of the day, they were caked white with chalk dust, useless until they were cleaned, and the privilege of clapping them fell to whichever lucky child had earned the teacher's favor. 2 kids would carry them outside or to the open window and slam them together, sending up clouds of chalk that floated in the afternoon light and coated their sleeves in fine white powder. It was messy, it made you sneeze, and every student wanted the job. That chalk dust settled into everything: the windowsills, the floor, the teacher's dark cardigan. As whiteboards and dry erase markers replaced the slate, the felt eraser and its glorious dusty ritual were clapped out of existence. Number 24. The mimeograph machine and its cousin, the spirit duplicator, produced the most beloved smell in the history of American education. When the teacher handed out a fresh worksheet, the whole class lifted it to their faces and breathed in that sharp, sweet, slightly intoxicating aroma of the purple ditto ink. The pages came off the drum still faintly damp, the text printed in that unmistakable violet blue, sometimes smudged where the teacher had cranked too fast. Making the masters was painstaking work, typed or written onto a waxy sheet, and a single mistake meant starting over. The machine itself was a hand-cranked contraption that lived in the office or the supply room. When photocopiers arrived and quietly took over, the purple ink and its addictive perfume faded away, and an entire generation lost a smell they would never forget. Number 23. The film strip projector turned an ordinary afternoon into an event. The teacher would pull the shades, thread a roll of 35mm film into the machine, and project a single still image onto the pull-down screen at the front of the room. A record or a cassette played the narration, and at the sound of a soft beep or chime, a student was assigned the important job of advancing to the next frame with a turn of the knob. The films covered everything: the food pyramid, fire safety, the wonders of the Panama Canal, and the gentle hum of the projector's fan in the darkened room could lull a class into a happy daze. There was always a hero who could fix the film when it jammed. Video and then digital classrooms made the film strip obsolete, and the little rolls were boxed away forever. Number 22. The pull-down world map hung above the chalkboard on a spring roller, ready to be tugged down whenever geography demanded it. What makes those maps so striking now is how many of the countries on them no longer exist. Children in the 1950s traced their fingers across a globe that showed the Soviet Union sprawling pink across half the world, a French Indochina, a Belgian Congo, and colonial borders drawn by faraway empires. The teacher would yank down the map with a satisfying snap of the roller and point with a long wooden stick at places most kids would never visit. Those maps were authoritative, almost sacred, the window through which children saw the whole planet. As borders redrew themselves again and again over the decades, those old maps became historical artifacts, rolled up and retired from the wall. Number 21. The metal lunch pail was a kid's prized possession, swinging from one hand on the walk to school. The dome-topped style, shaped to hold a thermos of milk or soup in the rounded lid, was the classic, made of sturdy painted steel that could survive years of being dropped, kicked, and stacked in the cloakroom. By the mid-1950s, character lunchboxes printed with cowboys, rocket ships, and television heroes turned the humble pail into a status symbol. Inside waited a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, and maybe a homemade cookie, packed by a mother before dawn. The clatter of a dozen metal boxes opening at noon was the sound of lunchtime itself. Plastic, and later concerns over the heavy steel as a playground weapon, ended the era of the metal lunch pail almost completely. Number 20. The morning milk break delivered small glass bottles of cold milk to children at their desks, a ritual built into the school day. Each bottle held a third of a pint, capped with a little cardboard or foil disc, and the cream often floated at the top in a thick plug. A milk monitor was appointed to hand them out, carrying the heavy wire crate from desk to desk, and woe to the child who shook the bottle and got mostly cream. The federal milk program made it affordable, sometimes just a few pennies a week, part of a national push to keep growing children well fed. The clink of glass bottles being collected and returned to the crate marked the end of the break. Cartons replaced bottles, vending machines replaced the monitor, and the glass bottle milk break poured away. Number 19. The potbelly stove was the literal heart of the older 1950s classroom, especially in rural schools where central heating was still a luxury. That black cast iron stove squatted in the corner, fed with coal or wood, and the teacher or an older boy was responsible for keeping it burning through the cold months. Children whose desks sat closest to the stove roasted, while those by the windows shivered in their coats. And on the bitterest mornings, the day began with everyone huddled around the warmth. Wet mittens and boots were set near it to dry, filling the room with the smell of damp wool and coal smoke. The stove demanded constant tending and carried real danger. As school buildings modernized with radiators and furnaces, the potbelly stove was hauled out, and with it went the corner where the whole class gathered to thaw. Number 18. The cloakroom was a small, dim chamber just inside the classroom door, and it played a role no modern coat hook can match. Lined with pegs and shelves, it swallowed up the wet coats, scarves, galoshes, and lunch pails of an entire class, keeping the puddles and the smell of damp wool out of the learning space. But the cloakroom was more than storage. It was the one spot just out of the teacher's direct sight, the place where whispered secrets were traded and small dramas played out in the gloom. Being sent to stand alone in the cloakroom was also a quiet punishment, a banishment from the warmth of the room. As open coat racks and lockers replaced these little alcoves, the cloakroom and all its shadowy social life simply disappeared. Number 17. Cast iron radiators clanked and hissed beneath the windows of countless American schools, a presence as constant as the clock on the wall. These heavy-ribbed monsters, painted silver or institutional green, brought steam heat to the classroom, and they announced themselves with a symphony of bangs, knocks, and gurgles as the steam rose through the pipes. On a snowy morning, kids draped their wet mittens across the top to dry, and the smell of warming wool filled the room. Sitting too close meant baking, sitting too far meant freezing, and the radiator's metallic warmth became part of the memory of every winter school day. They were also dangerously hot to the touch, a lesson many learned the hard way. Quiet, efficient, modern climate control replaced them, and the clanking radiator fell silent. Number 16. The brass handbell sat on the teacher's desk, and its bright ring governed the rhythm of the entire day. Before electric bells were wired into every building, the teacher or a trusted student sent out to the steps rang a heavy brass bell to call children in from the schoolyard. That clear, carrying sound meant recess was over, meant line up, meant the day was about to begin. In one-room schoolhouses, the same bell summoned children from up to a mile away across the fields. Holding that bell and ringing it was a serious responsibility, a small taste of authority handed to a chosen pupil. The bell had weight, history, and a sound that traveled. Automated electronic tones replaced it in nearly every school, and the warm clang of real brass was retired to a shelf as a keepsake. Number 15. The wooden hall pass was a physical object you carried as proof you had permission to be out of the room. Instead of a slip of paper, many 1950s classrooms used a heavy block of wood, sometimes an old ruler, a chalkboard eraser, or a paddle-shaped piece painted with the word pass or simply hall. A child clutched this oversized token on the long, echoing walk to the restroom or the office, and anyone who saw you in the corridor knew you were there legitimately. The bigger and more ridiculous the pass, the better. And some teachers chose comically large objects so no one could sneak it into a pocket. That clunky wooden pass was a small ritual of trust and permission. Digital sign-outs and laminated cards replaced it, and the wooden hall pass walked off for good. Number 14. The Big Chief tablet was the writing pad on which millions of American children learned their letters. That instantly recognizable newsprint tablet, with its rough cream-colored pages and wide-spaced lines, was made for young hands still mastering the alphabet. Paired with a fat beginner's pencil almost too thick to hold, it absorbed years of wobbly capital letters, practiced rows of the same word, and the first shaky attempts at writing one's own name. The paper was cheap and slightly pulpy, the kind that could snag a pencil tip, but it did its job for pennies. Generations of kids associate the smell and feel of that tablet with the very beginning of literacy. As branding changed and notebook styles modernized, the classic Big Chief tablet, with its distinctive cover, faded from store shelves and classroom desks alike. Number 13. The dunce cap was the most public humiliation a 1950s classroom could offer, and for a long time it was considered ordinary discipline. A child who failed a lesson or misbehaved might be made to wear a tall, conical paper hat, sometimes marked with a D or the word dunce, and sit on a stool in the corner facing the wall for all to see. The idea was that shame would correct behavior, and few questioned it at the time. The cap turned a struggling student into a spectacle, a warning to everyone else in the room. To modernize, it looks unbelievably cruel, a relic of an era with very different ideas about children and learning. As understanding of child psychology and learning differences grew, the dunce cap was recognized as harmful and discarded, surviving today only as a cartoon symbol. Number 12. The paddle hung on the wall or waited in the teacher's desk drawer, and corporal punishment was an accepted part of school discipline across much of 1950s America. A wooden paddle, sometimes drilled with holes to swing faster, was used to deliver swats for everything from talking back to failing to finish work. And the principal's office was a place children genuinely feared. The threat of it shaped behavior in ways a stern word never could, and many adults today still remember the dread of being sent down the hall. Rulers across the knuckles served the same purpose for smaller offenses. It was simply how things were done, rarely questioned by parents who often endorsed it. Changing attitudes and decades of reform pushed corporal punishment out of most American schools, and the paddle on the wall vanished. Number 11. Duck and cover drills brought the anxieties of the Cold War straight into the elementary classroom. Children of the 1950s learned that at the flash of a bright light or the wail of a siren, they were to dive under their wooden desks, tuck their heads down, and clasp their hands behind their necks to shield against an atomic blast. A friendly cartoon turtle named Bert taught them the routine, and it was practiced as regularly as a fire drill. Under those desks, kids crouched in nervous silence, half game and half genuine terror, absorbing a fear no child should carry. The drills reflected a real dread that hung over the entire nation. As the immediate panic of the early atomic age eased and the futility of the exercise became clear, duck and cover drills faded from the school calendar. Number 10. The 48-star American flag hung at the front of every classroom, and the children who saluted it each morning were pledging to a country that looked a little different than it does today. Until 1959, the flag carried 48 stars arranged in 6 neat rows of 8, before Alaska and then Hawaii joined the Union and pushed the count to 50. Every school day began with the Pledge of Allegiance, hand over heart, eyes on those stars and stripes. In 1954, the words "under God" were added to the pledge, a change every student suddenly had to learn. That 48-star flag, so familiar to a generation, became outdated almost overnight when statehood redrew the banner. The old flags were retired and replaced, and the version millions of children grew up saluting passed quietly into history. Number 9. The Weekly Reader arrived in classrooms like a small newspaper made just for kids, and its delivery was a highlight of the school week. That slim, colorful periodical brought current events, science discoveries, and gentle stories down to a child's level, written so a third grader could understand the news of the wider world. Children read about space, about faraway countries, about inventions and animals, often the first real journalism they ever encountered. Teachers built whole lessons around it, and many families saw it as a treasured window beyond the small town. The arrival of a fresh issue meant something new and interesting was about to be discussed. As the internet swallowed the world of print and classroom media moved online, the printed Weekly Reader eventually ceased publication, ending a ritual that spanned generations. Number 8. The teacher's wooden pointer was a long, slim rod that served as an extension of her authority. She used it to tap the pull-down map, to underline a word on the chalkboard, to indicate the next line in the reading primer without ever leaving the front of the room. That pointer commanded attention, directing 30 pairs of eyes wherever its tip landed. In stricter rooms, it carried a darker reputation, occasionally used to rap a knuckle or a desk for emphasis, and the sharp crack of wood on wood could snap a daydreaming class to order in an instant. Holding the pointer for the teacher was a small honor. Laser pointers, interactive boards, and a softer approach to classroom discipline made the wooden rod unnecessary, and it was set aside, taking a certain old-fashioned formality with it. Number 7. The card catalog stood in the school library like a great wooden monument, a cabinet of dozens of tiny drawers holding the key to every book in the building. Children learned to slide open a drawer, flip through the stiff index cards filed by author, title, and subject, and copy down the mysterious string of numbers that would lead them to a shelf. Those cards, typed or handwritten, smelled of old paper and were worn soft at the edges by countless fingers. Finding a book was a skill, a small treasure hunt that taught patience and order. The long rods running through the drawers kept the cards from spilling, a clever bit of engineering. Computer databases swept the card catalog away entirely, and those beautiful oak cabinets were sold off or scrapped, their drawers emptied of a century of careful filing. Number 6. The classroom encyclopedia set was the internet of its day, a proud row of matching volumes lined up on a shelf at the back of the room. World Book Britannica or Collier's, bound in dignified covers and lettered A through Z, held the answer to nearly any question a child could ask. When a student wondered about volcanoes or presidents or the planets, the teacher sent them to pull down the right volume and read. Those books were expensive, often the single most valuable thing in the room, and they were treated with care. The thin pages, the color plates, the smell of the binding, all promised knowledge waiting to be found. As information moved onto screens and grew instantly searchable, the printed encyclopedia became obsolete, and those once prized sets were boxed up and given away. Number 5. Library paste came in a wide tub with a little brush tucked inside the lid, and it was the glue of every 1950s craft project. That thick off-white paste had a distinctive smell, faintly minty or almondy, and a texture somewhere between pudding and putty. Children spread it across construction paper to make valentines, autumn leaf collages, and paper chains. And more than a few were caught sampling a fingerful of it, drawn in by that sweet, harmless scent. It dried slowly and wrinkled the paper, but it was cheap, washable, and forgiving of small hands. A shared tub sat at the center of the craft table, passed around with the brush. Glue sticks and white school glue in plastic bottles eventually replaced it, and the old tub of paste, with its tempting smell, disappeared from the supply closet. Number 4. The handwritten report card was a folded piece of stiff paper that carried a child's entire academic fate home in the teacher's own ink. There were no computer printouts, no online portals. The teacher sat with her gradebook and filled in each subject by hand, her cursive marking out the letters that would determine whether a child beamed or dreaded the walk home. Below the grades came handwritten comments, personal notes about effort, neatness, and conduct, and a line for the parent to sign and return. That signature was proof the card had been seen, and forging it was a temptation that ended badly for many. The whole thing carried a weight, the teacher's individual judgment rendered in her own hand. Printed and digital report cards replaced the handwritten version, and that personal ink-penned verdict became a thing of the past. Number 3. The spelling bee was a classroom institution, and the worn speller it drew from had roots stretching back generations. Children stood in a line along the wall as the teacher called out words of rising difficulty, and one by one they spelled aloud until a single champion remained standing. The tension was real, the silence between letters agonizing, and the misspelled word that sent a child back to their seat could sting for days. The famous blue-backed speller had taught American children for over a century, and its descendants still drilled the rules of I before E and the silent letters that tripped up the unwary. Spelling was treated as a competitive sport and a point of pride. As spell check quietly took over the job of catching every error, the classroom spelling bee and its battered word lists faded into rarity. Number 2. The desks themselves, bolted in rigid rows to the floor, defined the entire shape of the 1950s classroom. These were heavy affairs of cast iron and wood, the seat of one desk attached to the writing surface of the desk behind it, lined up in unmoving columns that all faced forward toward the teacher and the chalkboard. A child sat where they were assigned and stayed there, the desk a fixed island that could not be turned, grouped, or rearranged. The lift-up lid revealed a cubby for books and supplies, and the worn wooden surface bore the carved initials and ink stains of pupils long gone. That bolted-down geometry reflected a whole philosophy of order and obedience. As education embraced movable furniture, group tables, and flexible learning, the rows of fixed desks were unbolted and carted away, and the classroom opened up forever. Number 1. And finally, in first place, the real slate chalkboard was the beating heart of every 1950s classroom, the surface on which the entire school day was written. Stretching across the front wall in deep black or forest green, it caught every lesson, every spelling list, every arithmetic problem, worked out in the teacher's careful hand. Children went up to it in turn, chalk squeaking, to solve a sum or diagram a sentence in front of the whole class, their successes and stumbles visible to everyone. The chalk tray below held sticks worn to nubs, and the dusty erasers that needed clapping clean, and the smell of chalk hung over everything. Writing on the board was a privilege and a trial, a public test of what you knew. Smartboards and dry erase whiteboards have replaced it almost entirely, and the squeak of chalk on slate, once the constant soundtrack of American childhood, has gone silent. From the hand-crank sharpener that opened our list to the slate chalkboard that crowned it, these 30 vanished objects tell the story of how American childhood itself transformed. Which one did you forget existed? Which one do you miss the most? Drop it in the comments and share this with someone who still remembers the smell of that purple ink. Thanks for watching.